Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Burson, in rough figures, how many people are on the terror watch list?
So I'm just checking to see what on the terrorist, the consolidated terrorist watch list, we're talking just under 1 million.
Under 1 million. Okay. What countries, and this could be for anyone, constitute the greatest threat and attempts to enter the United States illegally that would be, perhaps flagged by being on these lists?
I can't, so there, of those 1 million records, there are the subsets of the no-fly list, which is about 100,000, and the selectee list, which is about 25,000. And I cannot give you the breakdown on the countries from which they come, although...
Do one or two come to mind?
Well, I think the ones in which we have seen terrorist threats would be obvious candidates.
Such as?
We have seen threats in Libya. We've seen threats in Pakistan. We've seen threats in a variety of countries in the Middle East and the Levant, and some in Central Asia.
Of the 500,000 a year that we think are overstaying their visas, given that we have no comprehensive exit tracking program, what countries have abused this the most?
So, Mr. Russell, remember, in order to come into the country in the first place, whether by visa or by the visa waiver program, there is extensive vetting against all of the lists. And in fact, in order to enter the country, there is a vetting, so it's not a question of people being on those
waiver
lists.
I understand the visa waiver will have necessarily a better or a higher bar, but of those that have been granted visas and they have overstayed them, what countries would you say violate that the most? To the extent, since we don't have an exit tracking program that's comprehensive, who would they be? What countries?
So the first point is that they were not on any of the lists, the known or suspected terrorist lists that we've discussed. In terms of what the breakdown is of that estimate, I cannot.
Do a couple of countries come to mind?
But I suspect there are those in which many of the people come from countries in which you send many people here, and you might see people here for violating the no work rule, for example. People who are coming here for, they purport to come for tourist B1, B2 reasons, and they end up staying. So those are going to be a different subset of countries by the terrorist.
My point, Mr. Secretary, I think that the magnitude of the problem in trying to protect our country is, it is enormous. We all recognize that, and we certainly recognize the dedication from administration to administration of folks like yourselves. I mean, you didn't just enter this field. You've been at it for decades through different administrations, and I respect that. But I point these things out because wouldn't we want to focus on those particular areas where the threat may be highest? And with regard to visa waivers, once an individual obtains an electronic system travel authorization, it is good for 2 full years, as long as the passport is valid. But given that ISIS rise has been less than 2 years, what steps are being taken to change the 2-year eligibility of the electronic travel authorization, and is this an area that is even being examined?
So yes, indeed, Mr. Russell, the ability to dial up and dial down the validity of the ESTA is one that the Secretary is very well aware of. It's contained in the Miller bill, and in fact, Secretary Johnson, as part of his own enhancements, actually added questions to the ESTA.
Don't you think we ought to just reset all eligibility at this point? Given that ISIS has been on the rise for less than 2 years, and now we have 2-year eligibilities out there, they could have been co-opted, converted. There's any number of issues that could have happened.
The way in which these databases operate and the way in which the vetting process takes place is there is 24/7, 365 revetting of that against whatever new information might come into the database. So in fact, there is an updated, it is updated by this constant refreshing of the database and the revetting of the names against the lists.
And then my last question, with the Chairman's indulgence, is given that we have 1.8 million Chinese that come to the United States each year for travel and for tourism and the like, they don't seem to have a problem conducting business. I would suggest that this entire visa waiver program, although it will have material impact on economies and other things, what do you see as the way ahead to restrict it so that we can secure our people the best when other countries seem to be able to operate without it?
So the visa waiver program, the only difference, first of all, China is not a member of the visa waiver program.
That's my point.
And not contemplated to become one. The visa waiver program, the only difference between the visa process and the visa waiver program is the consular office interview. You defer the time in which a U.S. official actually looks someone in the eye from the consular affairs office abroad to the time when a CBP officer sees that person coming in. But there's been all of this security vetting through the ESTA before that person arrives on the
2-year eligibility on the ESTA, correct? I mean, so once you've been eligible, it's good for 2 years.
Gentleman's time has expired.
That a CBP officer can actually make a counter decision upon encountering someone at the port of entry.
Thank you,
We now recognize the gentleman from